Don't listen to anyone who tells you size doesn't matter. When it comes to airplanes, size is everything. Today, we're covering the Soviet aircraft ever built. Tu-95. Bear the propeller tips on a Tu-95 spin faster than the speed of sound every single flight. That means the most powerful turboprop engines ever built are generating a continuous sonic effect, not a boom. A sustained roar that travels down through the water and into the hull of submarines running silent 200 feet below the surface. The U.S. Navy documented it. A submerged boat could track a bear by sound alone, the way you'd track a freight train through a wall. The acoustic signature was so consistent that operators could identify which aircraft it was before it crossed the horizon. Pilots flew missions of up to 25 hours inside that noise. The hearing protection in the early decades was inadequate. Foam inserts rated for industrial machinery, not for contra-rotating blades. At supersonic tip speed, the engineers who signed off on the design knew that before the first aircraft left the factory. They calculated the noise levels, wrote the number down, and kept building anyway. The aircraft was too important to delay. The pilots who flew it for 30 years paid that debt in frequencies they stopped hearing long before they retired. Myasishchev M4 Bison. On July 1955, those 10 M4s flew over Tushino Airfield in Moscow, in formation, banked, and came around again and again in different configurations. Until the Western observers on the ground had counted 28, the CIA estimated 800 would be operational by 1960. The bomber gap, the strategic imbalance that rewired billions in American defense spending and accelerated an entire generation of weapons programs, was built on a repeated flyby by 10 airplanes. The deception required almost no resources, a choreographed oval over a single airfield, executed in front of exactly the right audience, and the psychological damage was done before anyone landed. The part the Soviets never advertised, the M4 didn't have the range to reach the United States and return. The design bureau that built it was created in 1951 specifically for this aircraft and dissolved in 1960 when it became clear the mission was physically impossible for the plane as built. 9 years of institutional existence, hundreds of engineers, thousands of hours of design work for a strategic bomber that could not complete its only strategic mission. The aircraft that never had a target became the most effective weapon the Soviets fielded that decade. It never needed to fly east. It only needed to fly in circles. Antonov, a 22 Anti. In December 2025, the last operational M-22 in Russia broke apart in flight over the Uvadskoye Reservoir and killed all 7 crew. The aircraft had been officially retired 18 months earlier. It was flying anyway, a post-maintenance test flight. No public explanation given for why a retired airframe was still being put in the air. That detail matters when a government puts a retired aircraft back in the air without explanation and it kills its crew. The silence afterward is its own kind of answer. The An-22 held the title of largest turboprop aircraft ever built for 60 years, flew supplies into Chernobyl, carried airborne troops into Afghanistan,
and delivered 15,000 tons of equipment to the Armenian earthquake relief operation in 1988. It went where roads didn't exist and other aircraft couldn't land, onto unprepared strips, into mountain valleys, onto frozen ground that would have swallowed anything with narrower tires. Engineers designed the landing gear specifically for surfaces that weren't supposed to support an aircraft that size. The airframe was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be there. That's the kind of airplane that doesn't get a formal retirement, ceremony, or a museum placement, or a final flight with chase planes and a crowd on the tarmac. It just keeps flying until the paperwork catches up or until it doesn't come. Back 7 men were on board when the paperwork finally ran out. KM Ekranoplan. What do you call something that flies but isn't an aircraft, floats but isn't a ship, and shows up on neither radar system designed to track either one? In 1967, a CIA satellite photographed the KM on the Caspian Sea, and the analyst went quiet for months. The object in the image didn't match any category in the recognition manuals. It had wings, but the proportions were wrong. It had a hull, but it was moving too fast for anything. That displaced water. They called it the Caspian Sea Monster because that was more honest than pretending they understood what they were looking at. The answer was ground effect. When a wing flies close enough to a surface, Compressed air builds underneath and generates lift so efficiently that you can build an aircraft with proportionally tiny wings as long as it never climbs above 3 meters, 3 meters. The entire strategic logic of the machine lived inside that ceiling. The KM weighed over 550 tons and moved at 400 kilometers per hour at wave height, invisible to every radar net the West had built to defend against Soviet air attack. Those radar nets were calibrated for altitude. Nothing in the threat library flew at wave height because nothing that size was supposed to be able to. Rostislav Alexeyev, the engineer who designed it, broke his own safety rule, prohibiting chief designers from flying prototypes. He learned to fly specifically to sit in the cockpit for the first test run. He needed to know what it felt like from inside. No second-hand report was going to be sufficient for what he had built.
Beriev, a 40 Albaros. The Soviet Navy had a specific problem. Nuclear submarines were operating in the remote waters of the Arctic and the Western Pacific, thousands of kilometers from the nearest airstrip, and the aircraft designed to hunt them couldn't reach them. The ocean was winning by default, not through any tactical advantage, simply through distance and the absence of pavement. The solution was a jet-powered amphibious flying boat capable of taking off from any reasonably calm stretch of open water, landing on the ocean if necessary. If the water was flat enough, that was your base. The A-41st flew in December 1986 unintentionally during a high-speed taxi test. The crew realized there wasn't enough runway left to stop. The aircraft lifted off because there was no other option. That accidental first flight confirmed the design worked, which is one of the stranger sentences in Soviet aviation history. The crew didn't plan it, they just ran out of runway and made a decision in the seconds available, and the aircraft answered correctly. 2 prototypes were built. The second was 70 to 80% complete when the USSR collapsed and funding vanished, left in a hangar in a state that engineers described as nearly finished for the better part of 3 decades. In 2019, Russia revived the program, and the Navy ordered 3. No delivery date has been given. Somewhere, the second prototype is still there, still nearly finished.